Significant severe weather is coming to New England and Quebec of all places this evening, and it's going to bring the risk for a couple strong tornadoes, damaging winds, and perhaps a little bit of large hail as well. I'm going to break down everything that you need to know so that you can stay safe and stay weather aware. So without any delay, let's get right into the forecast. And jumping right into our day one categorical outlook, we are going to notice there's a 1 out of 5 marginal risk in place for Montana. That's going to be Northern Plains, Northern Rockies type of region where we're looking at the risk for a little bit of isolated damaging wind or hail, but that's not really our main concern. What you'll notice in the Northeast is that we do have a pretty rare enhanced risk for areas like Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and the northernmost corner of New York. So what you'll notice in the Northeast is that we do have that orange enhanced risk in place for northern Maine, northern Vermont, and New Hampshire, and the northernmost corner of New York. But you'll also see that a marginal and slight risk does extend. That's going to be your yellow being your slight and your green being your marginal, extending all the way down through the larger portions of New Hampshire, Vermont, and all of Maine for the most part, even including Portland. So definitely a pretty significant area that could be impacted by today's severe weather. Our tornado probabilistic outlook does have a 5% region in place that you're going to see here in brown. You're also going to be seeing a very, very large Sig 1 risk. That's your hatched area here. So that's going to include more than the northern halves of both Vermont and New Hampshire, plus almost all of Maine and the northernmost corner of New York, where a strong tornado definitely cannot be ruled out. And we'll take a look into those parameters on why exactly that is in a little bit. You're also going to notice that there's a 2% region that extends all the way down through the rest of Maine and a large portion of Vermont and New Hampshire, as well as even more of northern New York. Again, still in New England with our wind outlook, we are going to see this 30% Sig 1 region extend all the way through areas like Montpelier, Burlington, and Lancaster throughout Vermont and New Hampshire. We're also going to be seeing that Sig 1 risk extending down almost through all of Maine and the northern half again of Vermont, New Hampshire, and that north corner of New York, where we're expecting the risk for damaging winds. And this is especially going to be elevated if we get these bowing segments or clusters of thunderstorms. At that point, our tornado risk and hail risk would decline a little bit, and our wind risk would definitely be more elevated, as we do have pretty steep 7°C per kilometer low-level lapse rates being forecast for this environment. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit. And finally, for our day one outlooks, we've got our hail outlook, where we're looking at a very, very large 5% risk for damaging hail. You're also going to notice the Sig 1 region more contained a little bit towards the Vermont, New Hampshire, and Western Maine type of region, where there is an increased confidence in a couple of supercells being formed. And that's also the area where I would say the greatest confidence is going to be for a strong tornado if we're going to get one. But there are some conditions that are required to be met to get that, which again, we're going to talk about in just a minute. Looking ahead to our day 2 categorical outlook, you're going to notice that there is nothing on the map, just general thunderstorms. It's the first day in quite some time where we don't even have a marginal risk in place anywhere on the map for your day 2 outlook. So again, this is going to be for Wednesday, where we're expecting things to be pretty calm around the United States. In fact, even as we go forward in time through our day 3 outlook, our day 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 outlooks, there's nothing on the map. Now, we are expecting a little bit of a risk for severe weather to be possible on Friday. There's a lot of conditions with that in fail modes. So we're going to have another forecast video coming out on Friday to talk about that. But in the meantime, there's not really a whole lot coming. Looking at the timing for today's severe weather, what you're going to notice is that we have some morning storms that will fire off into New England, especially crossing the Canadian border into Maine. But then as we get to around 3 to 4 p.m., you're going to notice a lot of storms already beginning to fire off out here in Quebec. And all of these storms are going to roll through Montreal and Quebec City, and they're going to roll back down towards Maine and New England. So over time, you're going to see some of these updraft swaths continuing to build, which are those shaded in areas. Those are areas where you have pretty strong rotating updrafts as modeled by the HRRR anyways. You're going to see multiple of those beginning to form. And again, where we're seeing more of these clustering areas is less of a risk for hail and less of a risk for a strong tornado. There still will be a tornado risk with these, but less of a risk for a strong tornado. The greatest risk for a strong tornado is going to be back in this area where any supercells can remain discrete, especially as we get into the later evening hours. I'll show you some of those parameters in just a little bit. But you're going to see supercells continuing to roll through all of New England, especially Vermont, New Hampshire, and northern New York, and western portions of Maine through the evening hours. This is by 11 p.m. It's as far as the 10Z HRRR will take us, but we're definitely going to be looking at those storms continuing past 11 p.m. Central Time. And keep in mind, this is Eastern Time, so this is midnight Eastern Time. All right, we're going to be looking from the top down in our atmosphere. So starting up here at around 200 millibars, by the end of our forecast period, this is by 11 p.m. Eastern time this evening, you're going to notice that this jet streak is kind of in place in Quebec. And you'll notice that New England is kind of in that right exit region of the jet streak, which has historically been correlated with sinking motion. But recent literature has suggested that instability in severe weather setups is often able to overcome that instability and still generate a significant severe weather risk, specifically in the right exit region of a jet streak, whereas usually you'll have enhanced rising motion in the right entrance region and the left exit region. And that upper level jet streak is really going to help us get some shear into this environment. You're going to notice these shear values really starting to increase throughout New England and Quebec by around 11 p.m. So especially in the later evening hours in Quebec, where some of those residual supercells may still be existing, especially near Montreal and heading down towards areas like Newport, Burlington, or Berlin, New Hampshire, for example. So you're going to notice that some of these shear values aren't looking as impressive as we go a little further south, and that's why there's less confidence in severe weather maintaining itself as far south towards areas like Boston or central New York. Now that 0 to 6 kilometer bulk shear vector is going to drive a lot of our storm motion. What you're going to notice is that all of these storm motion vectors are really coming straight down to the southeast, which is pretty perpendicular to that surface cold front that I've drawn on the map. That's going to be oriented something pretty similar to what I have drawn on the map here. So the more perpendicular we are to that cold front, the more likely we are to have discrete supercells in a discrete storm mode, which would be more conducive to that large hail and perhaps a few strong tornadoes. Now at 500 millibars, what you're going to notice here is that we have this ridging pattern that has developed throughout the northern Rockies into the northern plains, and that's what's driving this northwesterly flow throughout Canada that is driving our severe weather. So at 500 millibars, you're going to see a lot of enhanced motion into Quebec and New England, and that is going to be the main driving factor for our severe weather this evening, as you see those deeper purples really getting into that region by the evening hours. This is by midnight here, Eastern time this evening. So a lot of lift will be in place, as 500 millibar motion is indicative of divergence and therefore rising motion. Down at the surface, looking at our moisture and winds, that cold front is going to become pretty apparent pretty quickly. By 11 p.m. here, you can see it clear as day on the map. There it is. And again, remember that bulk shear vector and our storm motion vectors that we were drawing before. It's pretty perpendicular to that forcing mechanism, which is why we're looking at more of a discrete storm mode for this afternoon and evening. And then finally, another important thing looking at our dew points is that we just have plenty of moisture available. Dew points up into the 70s in some areas in the region where we're expecting the severe weather. So very, very potent moisture at the low levels. All right, jumping into our mesoscale parameters, we are going to be looking at our mixed layer CAPE here. You're going to notice that by 5 p.m. here, we're starting to get some really significant values on the order of 3,000 plus joules per kilogram of CAPE. So a lot of instability present in the mixed layer. And you're going to notice those values are really going to continue through like almost 9 p.m. Eastern time here. And that's why we're looking at a pretty elevated risk even into the overnight hours. Still by midnight Eastern time, plenty of values exceeding 2,000 joules per kilogram, where we could still be seeing supercells in this environment. Here we're looking at our 0 to 3 kilometer storm relative helicity, which is just how much spin an updraft is able to ingest. You're going to notice a lot of spin available to these updrafts into the early evening hours. This is by 9 p.m. here. And even as we continue forward in time, still a lot of areas where there's plenty of spin available to updrafts. So that's one of the reasons we're looking out for that tornado risk. But you'll notice in Maine, especially in eastern Maine, we're not seeing quite as much of that risk. And that's why my greatest area for confidence in tornadoes is definitely going to be back through this region. One thing that eastern Maine does have in favor for it for a tornadic environment is lower LCL heights. You're going to notice that around 10 p.m. here, we're going to see some of these LCLs towards the western part of New England, out towards Montreal and areas like Burlington, are not going to be quite as low. So the more surface base that any storms can remain, the more likely we are to have a stronger and longer lived tornado. But you're going to notice in Maine, those LCL heights are especially low there. So definitely can't rule out a strong tornado there. I just don't think it's quite as favorable. But in general, still a large risk for tornadoes for this entire region, as the conditions are decently favorable. Now, I don't have time to show you the specific agreements and disagreements amongst our models, but you will notice that even by 10 p.m. Eastern time, we're still looking at really high mixed layer CAPE values from the RAP. So definitely a lot of agreement in place, and some models even forecasting peak mixed layer CAPE values into the later evening hours by, this is 11 p.m. here now. So still looking at a lot of instability available, and definitely the risk for nocturnal storms. And that's part of why this risk in the Northeast is definitely so concerning for this evening. All right, last thing here, I did just want to look at one sounding. So we are looking at around 9 p.m. Eastern time here near Newport, Vermont. So we're looking at decently fat cape here in this environment. So steep mid-level lapse rates still present, as everything here is going to be above 7 degrees Celsius per kilometer. We're also going to be looking at this LCL being around 747 meters. So that's pretty low, decently surface-based. Your mixed layer cape also clocking in above 3,000. So at 9 p.m., this is a really powerful sounding here. We're also going to be noticing that 0 to 1 kilometer storm relative helicity here at 135 meters squared per second squared. So that is not insanely excessive, but definitely potent enough where we could see a strong tornado in this environment. And when you look at our hodograph here on the right-hand side, you're going to notice that shaded in area in light blue is going to be that storm relative helicity. And you are going to notice a little bit of curvature in our hodograph with height. This hodograph has been tagged for tornado and severe weather. So definitely a very favorable environment throughout the evening hours. And that's part of the reason I'm concerned with a little bit of a nocturnal tornado threat as we get past sunset in New England here tonight. And that's going to take us to the end of today's forecast video, but we are going to be going live tonight, broadcasting this whole event from start to finish, from the afternoon through the evening hours, maybe even into the overnight hours, depending on how things go. So make sure that you're subscribed and have notifications turned on for that so that you don't miss when we go live, so you can stay safe and stay weather aware. Thank you for trusting us with your source of trusted severe weather coverage and weather coverage in general. Stay safe out there, and we will see you soon.